Hello there. This video, I think, is going to be a couple of things. It's going to be a short update, but then it's also going to be me talking you through the experience of my wife being diagnosed with breast cancer and really what we went through from start to the point where we're pretty much done with all of the cancer treatment, or most of the cancer treatment, the most significant portion of the cancer treatment. So let me just jump right in and share my update because it's one that I'm pretty excited about. Last week was my wife's very last day of radiation therapy. And this is where they, hook you up in this machine and they zap you with radiation in a very precise way just to ensure that they reduce the size or remnants of any cancerous tissue or cancerous cells that may still be in the body. And this is usually something that occurs after, other forms of treatment have taken place. So there could be a surgery where, cancerous tumors or lumps have been removed. But in addition to things like chemotherapy, where you've had those repeated infusions and that's done what it does to the body to eliminate those fast growing cells and get you into a state where your margins are improved or undetectable for the most part. And then radiation really is sort of, at least for our journey anyway, it's been sort of like an assurance step, meaning they've looked at what we've done from a surgical standpoint and from a chemotherapy standpoint, and they've decided that radiation is really recommended just to reduce the chance of recurrence. And, my wife is all about, living a nice long life. So she opted for the radiation, even though I think what they had told us was you have a 4% chance of recurrence and radiation would reduce that to a 2% chance. And the way that she was looking at it is really simple, right? A 2% chance is better than a 4% chance. So she went ahead and proceeded with it. But the radiation comes after not only lumpectomy surgery, which for a variety of reasons that I'll talk about ended up becoming double mastectomy surgery, and then chemotherapy, which was quite an endeavor. And then after chemotherapy, then came the radiation. There's more that we still have to do, but this is really, I think, sort of the most significant of the portions of the treatment, and it finally came to a conclusion last week with very little fanfare. When you're going through chemotherapy, a lot of times you'll see like a bell, in the office. You ring the bell when it's your last chemotherapy treatment. Same with radiation. If it's the last radiation treatment for your journey, you get an opportunity to ring that bell. My wife didn't do that for either. She didn't do that for the chemotherapy. She didn't do that for radiation. Not too sure why. I don't even think that she knows why she didn't do it, but she didn't. So I didn't really feel like, the big fanfare that I was hoping for ended up happening. But that was it. She was over. We celebrated quite simply by going out to dinner as a family. We went out to dinner. We went to the Cheesecake Factory, which is at a mall. And while we were sitting there having dinner, we began to get nostalgic about malls. Like the mall that we were actually having dinner in was the mall that, I used to go to all the time whenever we needed mall stuff, I guess, as a child. And, I said, it'd be great if we could just, after dinner, just walk over to Walden Books and pick up the latest Garfield book. Like that was a thing that we used to do at that mall back in the day. So we started walking around. We actually did find a bookstore in the mall. It wasn't Walden Books. They're long gone, I believe. They're long gone. But we did find kind of a secondhand bookstore that was there that actually had a Garfield book. So we picked it up and bought it. It was kind of funny. But that was it. That was our big celebration. Was we simply went out to dinner at a chain restaurant, walked around the mall for a little bit. So not very big fanfare, but a huge milestone. And that's really because the whole cancer thing has just been a significant journey, I feel, for my family, particularly my wife. But it had an impact on me. It's an impact that I don't talk about that often, and I don't talk about it that often because I have this weird sort of thing in my head where I'm like, it's not my story. I don't know if the feelings that I have are good to share, if they're helpful, or if they make, concerns worse. I really don't know. And I think in retrospect, it probably would have been a good idea for me to kind of see a therapist, I think, as all this stuff was going on, just because I've really been in my head about, what can I or what can I not talk about comfortably? And do I need to filter my thoughts or my concerns when I share them with my wife? It was really just not a question that I was ever able to answer on my own. So I don't know that I did that very effectively. But at the very least, what I want to do is try to document these thoughts, express to anybody who's listening or watching, this is what I experienced. These are my thoughts on it, and see if maybe that kind of maybe aligns with somebody else's journey down the road. Somebody might find this video and think, oh, okay, so this is what this guy went through. Great. And, listen and pick up some notes, I guess. But what I wanted to do, in addition to just sort of, indicate that we are at this milestone where, all of the surgeries, all of the chemotherapy, and all of the radiation is finally done. We're now moving on to the easier steps, or the supposedly easier steps, where we're doing things like, looking at, hormone blockers and treatments that, are, easier to take, like pills that you can ingest, and treatments that last over the course of several years, but don't involve this intense level of therapy. But I want to talk about, how we got to this point, and just share sort of an outline, a high-level outline of what we experienced from the moment that she was diagnosed to where we are today. So back in April of 2025, my wife was awaiting the results of a mammogram and got word that there was some abnormality that they needed to follow up on. And I want to say that there may have been a period of time where I think a year prior, where she had one of those tests, a test exclusive to women. I can't remember if it was a mammogram or a pap smear or something like that, where they said, oh, hey, something's not right here. Let's go ahead and double check. And they called her back. They did the double check, and everything was fine. So when they ended up saying, hey, we've got your mammogram results here, something's not quite right, let's have you come back in. Initially there's that sense of, concern and maybe even panic. And my wife had said to me, hey, this is what's going on, and here's how I feel about it. And she was very nervous. And I had said, hey, look, we've experienced this before when they say that they see something that causes them concern. It's, them conducting their business with an abundance of caution. It's their job. Let's just assume that everything is going to be okay, just like it was the last time. But she just had this feeling that that wasn't going to be the case. And she kept insisting, we can't just, rest comfortably that everything's going to be okay. We need to be, ready for the possibility. And I'm like, well, that's a bridge we can cross when we get there. I mean, really, I put forth quite a bit of effort to make her feel like, hey, we don't know what we don't know. Don't jump to conclusions. It could be anything. It could be nothing. Don't make yourself sick over it until you know that you have a reason to be concerned. And all of my energy went into trying to get her to, just be calm about that follow-up. And that's an important thing to remember, because I do have a lot of guilt about that because of how it ended up turning out. But she ended up going in for her follow-up, and, they're doing an ultrasound and they're looking at things, and, she can just tell by the demeanor, by the facial expressions, and by the conduct of the people that were in the office that they had found what they thought they had found, and, they were sort of taking the next steps to, proceed with her treatment. They didn't tell her, because it's not their job to tell the technicians. They can't disclose those findings, and they're supposed to not be qualified to be able to identify those findings. But, they see it every day and they know what they know, and you could just sort of tell, like, there was something there and it wasn't good. And so she came home, told me that, and again, it was like, well, all right. But it was very quickly after that follow-up that, we got the news that, she was dreading, which was that, she does in fact have, a cancerous growth in her breast. And they were like, let's get moving on this right away. They wasted no time. So she was back in there. They got the PET scan. They determined that, they had a pretty clear sense of, where the cancerous growth was in one of her breasts, but also through that PET scan, they discovered that one of the lymph nodes under her arm had also become infected with cancerous growth. And that was a cause for concern for them. They indicated that when it reaches the lymph nodes, that's the way that it can travel all through the body. They expressed that to us. We did our research online and learned what that meant, and it was a really scary time. So we really did go from thinking, okay, something's going on, to or something may be going on, to something absolutely is going on, and it's potentially pretty serious. It could be a lot bigger than we're anticipating. So we had to kind of digest that information for a bit, and it was quite hard, particularly for my wife. Obviously, she was really worried about that being a true story. It ends up being a true story. She was quite upset and quite scared, and I was too. I did not know what this was going to mean. I didn't know how far along we were. There was just a lot of unknowns. The great thing is that we have medical coverage with a medical group that is phenomenal, and their cancer care is, I mean, it's top shelf. It's really, really good. So they were very high touch with us. They brought us in, they consulted with us and talked to us about everything that was going on. I mean, they associated us to an advocate within their office. If we had questions, we can call that person directly, and they would sort of facilitate any meetings or appointments that we needed scheduled. We got appointments scheduled with all kinds of people right up front. They scheduled us with a surgeon. They scheduled us with an oncologist. It was pretty quick. Things started to come together pretty rapidly. They sat us down with a surgeon who said, look, the best thing for us to do is to get that cancerous tissue out of there. They quickly scheduled my wife for a lumpectomy and advised that she remove all of the lymph nodes under her arm, not just the one that was infected. And that was to make sure that they got everything. Because the way that it works is, those cancerous cells, they can move around your body and you can't see all of them. There just could be a handful of cells that are indistinguishable or are undetectable, but they are there. And if left alone, that gives them the opportunity to multiply and grow, and then that's how you get recurrence of cancer after you feel like you've been given the free and clear. So their advice was, treat this aggressively. Let's get that cancerous tissue out of there. We'll get tissue around the cancerous tissue out of there, and we'll get all of those lymph nodes out from under your arm. And the idea being, operate with this abundance of caution. Go in there and just get as much out as possible, and then evaluate the tissue after the surgery and evaluate those margins and see, did we get it all or do we have more work to do? So we ended up going ahead and following their advice, and my wife was scheduled pretty quickly for that lumpectomy surgery and then the removal of those lymph nodes. The surgery seemed to go really well. I don't know what it is about my wife, but she handles pretty major surgeries quite well. And she was under for, most of the day, but came back and began to very quickly, come to and start to, show improvement, adaptability. It was a couple of days after the surgery, but she was, kind of up and at 'em and moving around and seemed like she was going to be pretty quickly on the mend. What we did notice, however, was after a couple of days, I want to say it was maybe 3 or 4 days into it, she started to have more discharge from the wound, which seemed unusual. We were expecting the discharge to be less as time went on, and it seemed like it was becoming more. And there was one day in particular where it seemed like kind of a lot. Like she would lay down on her back and maybe relax for a little bit, take a quick nap, and then she would sit up and she would just kind of feel it dripping from the wound, which seemed really unusual to us after a handful of days. We expected to see less of that. We instead were seeing a lot more. And then we just decided, hey, look, let's just keep it, safe. We'll run to the ER, let them check it out and see what's going on. So we go to the ER. Interestingly, people start evaluating her and looking at her and saying, no, I think you're probably okay. And I think that just has to do with the fact that she just kept the wound so clean, because we eventually had a surgeon come in who said, oh, I think I'm seeing an infection. And then that's when he discovered that, yeah, in fact, she was producing pus, and that's what was leaking from the wound. And the only thing that they could do to make sure that, they got her on the straight and narrow after discovering this infection was to slightly open the wound, which did not feel good, and completely express that wound on her breast and get all of that pus removed from it. It was not fun to watch, and it was particularly difficult for her because it was extremely painful. I cannot for the life of me remember what it was that they identified as the bacteria that they discovered, but they ended up doing a culture. And what they discovered was that it was a specific type of bacteria that's pretty common in surgical infections, the kinds of bacteria that you might find in an operating room. Now, that's not to say that they did anything wrong. It's just, a circumstance of operations. They are very, very hygienic in these operating rooms, but it's just not a perfect situation. You just don't know what's going to get into that wound, and she just had really bad luck. But the infection was quite severe and required high touch. So that's what they took care of for us in the ER. But then we had to go back and see the surgeon to let him take a deeper look. The surgeon was very concerned about the infection and told us, like, we had a really good doctor at the ER. He did everything that he needed to do, but our surgeon needed to open the wound entirely and look in and see how are things looking. And that's what he did. Like, I want to say the next day we're in there, he opens up the entire wound on her breast and exposes it and examines it and cleans it and then packs the wound and then sends us on our way with instructions, however, to come back to the hospital every single day and have that wound cleaned and repacked by their wound care specialists. So that was what we did. And we did that for a period of a couple of months, like through the summer. And it was really a lot to adapt to. We went in there every day. We met with the really, really kind RNs in the wound care center. They were amazing, just amazing, talented, thoughtful, wonderful people who took extremely good care of my wife. They went in there, they cleaned that wound every single day, they repacked that wound every single day, and sent us on our way. The tricky thing was they were not open on the weekends, and the wound needed to be cleaned and packed every single day, which meant I was on duty on Saturday and Sunday. So they had to train me how to do this as well, which meant Saturday and Sunday she was lying on her back at towards the end of the day in the late afternoon, and I would have to remove gauze from her wound, clean it out a very specific way, pack gauze back into that wound, cover it up very carefully, do all this with clean hands and gloves and the whole bit, and get her situated on Saturday and Sunday until we can go back on Monday and have the professionals take care of it. And we did this for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. The fascinating thing about it was it gave us this really up close and personal view into her wound and the way that the body works to heal. That was really fascinating. But at first, it was quite tough. It was a very harrowing experience at first. It was very challenging. It was very difficult for my wife emotionally, for me emotionally as well. But we got through it. The wound healed beautifully. And oddly enough, after that wound was healed, it was shortly thereafter that my wife was scheduled for that double mastectomy, making us kind of think to ourselves, why were we working so hard to clean and pack this wound when a mastectomy was in her future? So the way that we led to this mastectomy was kind of interesting. So when we were talking to the surgeon about the infection, after the infection came to light, one of the things that he had mentioned to us was he has to go back in. The lumpectomy that he had conducted was effective in that it removed the cancerous tissue. But part of that process is they look at all of the tissue that surrounds the tumor that they remove. And if there are any signs of existing cancer cells, and they evaluate margins, meaning what is the density of any cancerous cells that they can see in the tissue around that tumor. And if the margin is a certain percentage, it suggests that the spread is a wider area than they had anticipated. So basically what he was telling us was, we got some tissue out of the breast to account for that, that tumor, but we didn't get enough. And they are obligated, when they know that, to go back in to get more. And that's to ensure that the cancer doesn't spread. So I think it was at that time that my wife was like, no, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to do the double mastectomy, which seems rather extreme, but there was a very specific purpose that she chose to do that. The reason that the doctor wanted to go in was because the margins didn't look clear enough, meaning he thought that there was still a high chance of a recurrence. So to reduce that chance of recurrence, he wanted to go in and take more tissue. Now, my wife is thinking, what's my family history? And my wife actually has people in her family who have had breast cancer and had lumpectomies, chemotherapy, and then have gotten a clean bill of health, only to live, comfortably with the assumption that it's never going to come back. And then it does. 15, 20 years later, it shows itself again, and more surgery is required. And more chemotherapy and all the things that come with it are suddenly required again, meaning you've had breast cancer before, you've gone through that journey, it's not easy, and now it's happening again. My wife was like, look, that may happen to me, it may not, but it's something that exists in my family history, and so long as it does, it represents a chance that it can happen to me, and it's a chance that I don't want to take. So she opted for double mastectomy, and, the doctor, I think, was kind of relieved. The doctor doesn't want to recommend such a significant and major surgery if it isn't absolutely necessary. And you don't really know if it's absolutely necessary anyway. But they don't like to make that recommendation. But I do believe, just based on his reaction, that when my wife opted in for that, he thought, that's certainly going to take care of the problem. So even though he didn't say it, his demeanor, his response sort of gave us this sense of comfort, like that was the right decision. So that was what she did. So she went in there for that double mastectomy surgery. Before that happened, so in between the time that she had that double mastectomy and we were working on that wound and getting it healed, she began chemotherapy. And chemotherapy was interesting because it took place once every other week. So every other week. I think we would have chemotherapy, and then we would have a 2-week period where we had nothing. So I think it was every 2 or 3 weeks. And that was really just to give her an opportunity to, absorb the infusion, experience the effects, which can be rather significant, and then have time to kind of get back on your feet so that you can go in there healthy, and then they do it again. So she did chemotherapy. She was scheduled for only 4 infusions, but they were quite significant. They put her on a couple of IVs there, so there were 2 chemotherapy treatments. I wish I could remember their names. One of them took about 4.5 or 5 hours for the infusion to complete, and then the other one was really quick. It was about 30 minutes. So we were there when we would go to these things for a period of anywhere between 5.5 to 6.5 hours. It was a long day. She would come out of chemotherapy feeling fine, but over a period of about maybe 2 or 3 days is when it would really start to kick in. And then, she just was not feeling good. Sore, difficulty sleeping, just didn't feel herself. Changed her appetite, changed what she smelled and how she tasted. She didn't throw up, but I do remember her feeling nauseated at times. It definitely affects the way that you feel. You have stomach issues. It was unpleasant. It affected all kinds of things, like her sleep, her mental well-being. Her hair fell out. She was not looking forward to that, but it did. It fell out. She looked terrific, by the way. She has a very nice scalp, we discovered, so she looks good with a bald head. So that was a good relief for her, and I was not at all surprised. But she handled it really well, but it was tough. She would go in for that chemotherapy treatment that first time. We didn't know what to expect, and the first time they started to deliver that medication to her, she just got these crazy lower back pains just out of nowhere. And they would stop it really quick, and they're like, nope, you're not supposed to get that. They'd stop it. They'd slow it way down. They'd give her, they'd inject her with some sort of, steroid that is meant to counteract that reaction. Then they would slowly resume it over time after she had recovered. And I mean, it was amazing what they know about how to deliver that treatment to patients and how they're able to counteract some of the reactions, because your body wants nothing to do with that stuff. And they know what you need to, allow your body to take it in and let it do its destructive stuff. Because that's ultimately what chemotherapy is doing, is it's going into your body and it is just destroying cells. And I mean, it does a number on cancer, but it does a number on all kinds of other parts of your body as well. And that's really what makes it so difficult and why it takes a toll. One of the things that it does, though, is it completely annihilates your immune system. So if you know anybody who's on chemotherapy, it's likely that they have informed you, or maybe not, that they are immunocompromised, and that really means that your body is not its normal self. It's not 100%, and it can't fight infections the way that it normally could. After, I think it was the third chemotherapy session that she had, and this is what we noticed, was it starts to have this sort of compounding effect on your body. You get that first chemotherapy infusion, and it's like, whoa, that was pretty significant, the way that my body reacted to that. And then you get that second one, and it's like, whoa, that was still pretty significant, plus a little bit more. Then there's that third one, and that third one really kicks your ass. And that happened to her. I mean, her white blood cell count ended up dropping rather significantly, and I just cannot remember how it is that they discovered that. But I do recall that she was not feeling well. We went into the hospital. They checked her blood. They determined that her white blood cell count was not only low, but it was dangerously low. And because of where it was, they wanted to hospitalize her, like, immediately. So we went from being in the ER and just having them move her right into the hospital. This is after the third chemotherapy treatment. So she was hospitalized for the better part of a week, actually. She was, I think, in there for about 5 days and they checked her blood every day. And it wasn't until her white blood cell count was at a normal level that they were willing to discharge her. They finally did after about 5 or 6 days. And then what they learned from that was, hey, this is now starting to affect her immune system and her white blood cell count. So let's make sure that before the next chemotherapy treatment, she's given, the treatments that we gave her in the hospital to keep her white blood cell count up. So that was, again, that was something else that they added to her regimen, and she did that, and she stayed healthy for her last chemotherapy infusion and after it as well. But it was quite a ride. So she finally ended up getting through that chemotherapy treatment. She was then scheduled shortly after that for that double mastectomy, which was a significant surgery. She recovered from that surgery, I think, faster than she's recovered from anything at all throughout this entire journey. I mean, she came out of the hospital, like you would expect somebody to come out of the hospital who's had a major surgery. She's got the drains all over her and everything. But, I want to say 2 or 3 days after she was up, I think she was even like vacuuming the floor one time, cleaning up the house. It was almost like nothing had happened to her. I don't know if that was because she was just recovering quickly or she was just tired of the whole thing. But the point being that she recovered quite well. And she's now in a great state. I mean, her body is largely healed. She's completed that radiation now. She had radiation every single day for a period of about 2 weeks. I think it was 10 days. They took the weekend off. But she's got all of those radiation treatments now under her belt, and she's great. Is she feeling 100%? Definitely not. Like, she would object if she heard me say she's great. The chemo has had an impact on her body. She's sore a lot. She has difficulty getting comfortable to sleep, and that's sort of difficult. But all in all of the major surgeries are behind her. All of the major cancer treatments are now behind her. So from my perspective, she's just in a great spot. Her spirits seem high, even though she's dealing with, a lot of pain and discomfort still, most of which I think the doctors are assuming has to do with sort of residual effects of chemotherapy. But she's doing really good. And now the next thing that they're talking about is, hormone blockers for a period of, so many years. And that's to reduce the chance of recurrence. The cancerous cells, the type of cancer that she had, feeds on hormones. So this is an effort to give her body an opportunity to completely starve out the rest of any cancer cells if they exist. That's something that I don't think that she's looking forward to, which is understandable. And I think the other thing that she's almost certainly not looking forward to is they've got some sort of a plan to give her an infusion that will put her body into early menopause. And again, I think for the same reason, I think that's just to, make sure that they're doing everything that they can to prevent any recurrence of cancer, and this is one of the tools in their arsenal. It has been a significant number of events that we've had to kind of fight through since April of 2025. Here we are at the very start of 2026, and I'm just delighted to say that as of last week, all of that major stuff is now over. Now it's just a matter of, continuing to go through a lot of the treatments that they're recommending to prevent recurrence, and then staying vigilant, doing everything that we need to do to be aware of our own bodies, right? Get those checks, go to the doctor if something feels funny or off. Raise your hand and call it out. That's where we are now. It's been pretty significant. It's taken a pretty significant toll physically and mentally on my wife, but also some of us that are in the family here with her. And I think that's one of the things that I want to make sure that I'm talking about. I think that other people are going to endure some of this stuff too, and it would be good to know that there are others out there who have experienced it, what they've experienced, and how it went. So I'm going to talk a lot more about that, I think, on this channel, but I'm also going to get my wife to come in and talk about it as well. I talked to her over the weekend, chatted with her about this. She knows that I do this stuff, and I think it would be even more compelling and interesting if she could weigh in as well. So that is my goal. Anyway, that's a really sort of high-level outline of what took place from the moment that we were diagnosed all the way up to today, where we are basically done with some of the more significant treatments in her cancer treatment journey. So more to come, I'm sure, but that's it for now. And listen, if you are looking at this, if you are listening, if you are interested or want to know more, let me know by putting a like on this video. It helps me know that there are people out there. And if you could do all that YouTube stuff, it really helps me to know that there are people subscribing and interested in what it is that I'm talking about. Anyway, thank you, and I'll talk to you in the next video.